Hi, this is my psychology and film assignment by Hou-Neely. So first, our table of contents, we're going to go through the description and what movie they appear in and introducing the character, and then what diagnosis I think that the diagnosis of the disorder I think they have, and then the culture behind it and their movie and also outside of it, and then obviously the diagnosis itself, and then evidence, what symptoms they do or do not display, and then also their treatment plan with an ethical concern and cultural barriers for this particular character. And then finally, broader perspectives, which is the disorder outside the fictional world and how it's displayed within it. So, the description, I will be doing Katniss Everdeen in Catching Fire. She's a teenager that lives in borderline poverty. Lives in one of the poorest districts in her country named Panem, but she lives in District 12 and it's considered the smallest and the poorest district. And she volunteered to participate in a tournament called the Hunger Games, where she had to kill other kids because it's for kids 18 and under. Um, and she had to kill other children to survive. It's literally a fight to the death where 24 kids go in and only one comes out, or is supposed to be where only one comes out. So it's two kids from each district, and then she's experienced excruciating pain. In the first movie, she gets stung by these tracker jackers, and it's essentially a yellow jacket, but really, really painful. You experience hallucinations. It's genetically modified yellow jackets that are meant to be more painful than just a normal yellow jacket, which is already painful enough. Um, you also see her get burned in like the first movie, and then in the second movie, she gets shocked and electrically shocked and drowned. So she's been through a lot physically, but also mentally, where she's watched kids her age and kids younger than her die. And then she's part of the Hunger Games, it's like a national spectacle. They have TV interviews and everything like that try to make a spectacle of her pain and experience. She literally has to sell herself to try and survive, and you know, it's this whole thing. It's the Hunger Games is nationally broadcasted, so everyone can watch her fight to the death, and people watch these kids die. So it's literally a spectacle, and it's also a tradition to hold the Hunger Games. Every year they do it, and in Catching Fire, it's specifically the third quarter quell, which is every 25 years they hold like a special Hunger Games, and then it's held. She also lives in a world with like pretty cruel, um, and punishing government. You do something, and they will punish you. It's experienced mostly with like her mentor where his like whole family was killed because he won the Hunger Games based off of like playing how the government it's a whole thing. But you also see it through like they kind of rebel a little bit in one of the districts and you see just all these peacekeepers, so to speak, just start shooting and killing and hurting a bunch of people. So the diagnosis specifically for Katniss, I think she has post-traumatic stress disorder, which is more commonly known as PTSD. It comes from places of extreme trauma. It can include flashbacks of the trauma. Um, a lot of veterans are diagnosed with PTSD from their time spent in combat zones, and it's also correlated with increased amygdala activity and lowered medial prefrontal cortex activity. And while Katniss isn't technically a veteran, she did spend quite a bit of time in a combat zone, fighting to the death, killing other kids younger than her, older than her. So she's been through quite a lot, even in the first movie and obviously in Catching Fire, where she has to do this all over again, killing already victors, and a lot of them experienced, and a lot of them are a lot smarter than her, but she has to kill them to survive. Um, and then, oh, too far. So the culture with this diagnosis, I think if she went to a therapist in this film, I don't think she may be diagnosed, but I think a lot of her problems would be ignored and she wouldn't get the help that she needs to deal with this. There's um pretty famous scene that I'll reference later, but outside the film, I think it's pretty normalized in the sense that it's understandable for a lot of these like veterans especially to have like PTSD and it's hard for them to deal with. But I think it has gotten significantly less stigmatized over the years. A lot of things are trying to bring attention to it and get veterans the help they need, and obviously anyone else, rape victims, murder victims, not murder victims, but attempted murder victims, like the help they need when it comes to PTSD. And then the stigma itself, specifically, Mattal and a couple of other colleagues did this. I forget what college it's from, but it's in my sources. Um, reference a lot of veterans can be labeled as particularly dangerous or crazy, um, and they're violent, and those who volunteer for it are asking for this disorder, which I think is completely ridiculous. And I think in this case, a lot of people think that about Katniss because she volunteered to take over for her sister when it came to being in the Hunger Games. And then in this study, they asked veterans in combat zones how they reacted to how others see them and stigma surrounding them, which obviously a lot of them thought that they didn't ask for it. Like that's no one wants to be reminded constantly of their trauma. And a lot of them don't really view themselves as crazy or dangerous or violent. They just see like when those flashbacks of PTSD come back to them, um, a lot of them just say that they revert to their training, which I think is very understandable. And then, so those are like more the stigmas in our culture associated, and then the stigmas in their culture, I don't think would be, I think it'd be normalized. And then specifically in all cultures, I don't know if this disorder would be diagnosed in every single culture. I think a lot of it still is pretty normalized in the sense where it's like, oh, this is just what happens type of deal, not necessarily like this is what happens and we need to get them help. So then our evidence, this is one of the, I guess, famous scenes. So there we go, there's everything. So this is symptoms and how they are or aren't displayed. So two symptoms that my character displays, two symptoms that Katniss displays are nightmares. She wakes up from a dream, or I guess from a nightmare, screaming on her and Peeta's victory tour, and Peeta is the other victor that came from her Hunger Games. And she wakes up screaming and dreaming of something that obviously scares her. She literally is waking up yelling. He comes into her room and he's like, and she's like, he goes, I get them too, the nightmares, and she asks him to stay with her. So that's a pretty famous scene. And the DSM-5 asserts that nightmares are one of the criterion that has to be like, not has to be, but it asserts that nightmares is one of the criterion to be diagnosed with PTSD. And then hallucinations. So while she's hunting turkeys after the Hunger Games, she's hunting with Gale, which is one of her best friends. She hallucinates killing the tribute that killed Rue, which is the little girl that died in the first Hunger Games that she was trying to protect. And she ended up dying, and she killed the tribute that killed her. And that was one of the first um, tributes that she directly killed. She shot him with an arrow. Before that, she kind of cut down the Tracker Jacker's nest and killed one of them. So, but that's the first tribute that she directly kills, I guess, and that's who she hallucinates. And she kind of goes into a panic attack, doesn't know where she is, can't really breathe, and Gale has to calm her down and put her back into this world where she is and where she's so-called safe. And then one symptom that she doesn't show, um, I guess actually I think that's on the next slide. There's her avoidance. So I don't think a lot of people who suffer from PTSD avoid their trauma. And unfortunately, like when I say that she doesn't um display the symptom of avoidance, is that she's forced to deal with reminders of her trauma. She's forced to deal with the victory tour where she's literally constantly reminded that she won by killing these other tributes, killing these other kids. So I don't think that she has that. And then a specific study is that 32 veterans with PTSD, 88% of participants reported at least one nightmare a week. And then 72% of 47 patients were able to report less than nightmares using nabilone, a cannabinoid, which is typically used to control nausea and vomiting for chemotherapy patients. Um, So that's another study for that. And then the fourth thing is treatment. So my proposed treatment plan is stress inoculation training. One ethical concern may arise in a therapist pushing too hard on a patient, pushing them to feel more uncomfortable or for more details than necessary. So in this case, when Katniss is forced to deal with her trauma 24/7 on her victory tour and then going back into another Hunger Games, I think she's kind of been through enough. And at this point, because it's so televised, I don't think a lot of them need to know like the details of kind of behind her PTSD. I think a lot of it you can just see it. So, but that's like an ethical concern in general. And then the procedure would be have a couple sessions to gather information, perform breath training to help relax the patient, especially when she's hunting those turkeys. I think the breath training would really help her calm down and get back to a place where she knows she's kind of safe. And then the next and ongoing session should be used for cognitive restructuring, which is identifying and replacing negative thoughts and self-dialogue. So similar to the study conducted by Foe and colleagues, where 42% in the SIT condition, which is stress inoculation training, 42% of patients were found to have good end state conditions, and 42% of patients also lost their PTSD diagnosis. So what I mean by cognitive restructuring is in like, yes, she had to kill those tributes to survive, but in the sense she had to do that to survive to get back to her family, and it's not her fault that she did it because it's her government that put her in the place where she had to go through with killing these other tributes, and the government is at fault for all those deaths, not her. And then I say this in the sense where it's appropriate for this disorder, the stress inoculation training, due to the cruel punishments of the Capitol/slash government in this movie. It was literally fight to survive, and it helps relax and reframe situations in a light that may be able to produce a positive outlook and stronger mental fortitude. What I mean by that is like she had to do this, and it's unfortunate, and it's really terrible, but the government is what made her do it. She did it to protect her sister, and without her, her sister most likely would have died in the Hunger Games. But it's the government's fault for producing such a punishment for the districts rebelling that they had to now have 24 innocent kids come together and then fight to survive. And then Katniss receiving help. Um, I don't think she'd be able to receive help during her wartime, which in the Court of Quell and Victory Tour, the onlookers and those she's around may not think it's serious enough or they normalize it. When I say those she around, I mean like people from the Capitol and like obviously like the people who love the games in the sense where they just think it's part of the games. They don't see the terrible meanings behind it. Obviously, Peeta and Haymitch and Effie, which are all people she's very close to, and even Finnick, they all understand how terrible these games are. But I think a lot of like people in the Victory Tour, um, fans of the government, they don't see how bad it is. So I don't think that again, like I think her condition would be ignored and normalized. And then by the end of the trilogy of movies, she lives in a very quiet and barren town, so the readers like and watchers assume. So I don't think that there'd actually be like great enough great enough people or a good number of people or even like a good quality therapist to be available for her because she lives in such a quiet life. And it's kind of said that she's just kind of like they're left on their own to kind of just like give them a peaceful life. So I don't think she'd get like the exact therapeutic help that she might need. And then so broader perspectives. Accuracy, I do think that the PTSD was pretty accurate in this film. It shows how simple things can be symptoms such as hypervigilance and emotional outbursts. She's very worried all the time. She's always on edge. Like people startle her, and she gets pretty like not angry, but she jumps and is ready to always fight for her life. So that's what I mean by vigilance, excuse me. And then understanding as well. Done well, especially like in these movies, it's really acknowledged that these movies did a great job of kind of portraying PTSD. So done well, I think it can bring awareness. However, done badly, it can enforce stigmas of these people being crazy and violent, and then also spread false information like what symptoms may or may not be. So I think that's also a lot of an issue with this specific disorders that, and just overall, like pop culture can harm the way things are portrayed and therefore give people a false understanding of it or even lead to more harm. And these are all my sources. And yeah, thank you. Sorry, it's pretty long. Stop share.